Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell, and this is the biggest build I have ever done in the history of my channel. A full Age of Mythology culture, complete with all new gods, god powers, myth units, human units, buildings, techs, relics, heroes, everything. It's going to be a long one, folks, so buckle yourselves in, grab a drink and a snack, and settle in to learn about the fascinating mythology of the Sumerians. This is a really special build. I've been working on it for over a month now, and I'm not going to waste any time because we got a lot to cover today. But before I do, a couple quick things. First of all, you like that music, that gorgeous music you're going to be hearing periodically throughout the build? Well, that is original. I commissioned a fellow named Alta off of my Discord server to create an original track for this build. He researched it beautifully, and if you want to learn more about his process and how he made the decisions he did in composing it, links to his notes as well as the full track can be found in the speaker notes of this slide. Additionally, thanks to my longtime viewer Amiki for his consultancy on this build. He knows a good bit about Sumeria and helped idiot check me when I was going through my design. This Sumerians build is brought to you by me and my game Enclave. I am a tabletop role-playing game designer, and last year I crowdfunded my first ever published work, Enclave. It is a entirely diceless tabletop role-playing game. So if you're interested in seeing what the hell gives me the right to call myself a game designer, or you're just looking to pick up a new TTRPG or maybe get into the genre, please do join our Discord server, link in the description box down below and in the speaker notes of this slide. It is a very special game that I've been working on for over a decade, and I think that you could find a lot to like in it. Additionally, before we begin, let's do a brief summary of my approach. When I am designing, I try to be true to the myths. I want to stay as faithful as possible to source material within the confines of the game. I have way less emphasis on pop culture, if any at all. And historicity for human units is a focus, though secondary. Some anachronism is completely acceptable in my eyes. I rarely change or add something just for balance's sake. I want to have some sort of grounding to justify it. I'm trying to go for stuff that feels like it might fit in Age of Mythology, even if it's not perfect. I'll be speaking also in broad strokes in this presentation. I'm not going into the specific details of every single stat of every single unit. Also of note, I am a hobbyist, not a trained classicist. I know quite a lot about mythology. In fact, I know a lot more about it than history, but I still make mistakes and need to simplify all of the time. So if you see a mistake, please let me know down in the comments below, and all of my sources are linked in the speaker notes of this slide. I did a lot of this off of my own innate memory and knowledge, but I consulted plenty of additional sources when I was putting this together, so if you want to see them, check them out there. And if you want to support me, leave a comment and a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you have a couple bucks to spare, support me on Ko-Fi, and join our awesome Discord server, the Lava Chamber Discord server. Link in the description below. We have good fun. And with that, let's get into the build, beginning with a background. Who were the Sumerians? Both mythologically and historically. Well, beginning with historically, Sumeria was, of course, the earliest known civilization in the archaeological record, developing in what is now Iraq around 4000 BC and lasting until around 2000 BC. They created the earliest known writing system, cuneiform, and their society was split into many rival city-states, the first known examples of mass urbanization in human history as well. They were also home to what you could very much argue is the first definitional empire in history, namely Anatum of Lagash in around 2500 BC. Sumeria was known to its people as the land of great lords, Kingir in their tongue. They had a highly complex society, early masters of farming technology, which enabled them to support a robust and large population full of professionals and bureaucratic officials that didn't have to spend their whole life producing food to feed themselves and could instead push forward advancement and innovation. The Sumerians referred to themselves as the black-headed people. Sumerian as we call them, came from a later Akkadian term. And just to drive this home, they had a mind-boggling population. According to some estimates, as much as 1 in 20 humans worldwide were Sumerian at one point during their height. Pretty wild. Also of note, women had pretty substantial social power, especially before about 2300 BC with the rise of Akkad, and were often able to hold land and some government and religious offices. So a very interesting society. Here they are. On the right, you can see this little picture, statues of themselves looking like polite little pangolins, you know. Now, moving on to Akkad. This was the inheritor of Sumeria, a city-state within Sumeria itself that took control of Sumeria and the Fertile Crescent more broadly in around 2300 BC. They were the greatest early empire of the world, spanning from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea as shown on the map on screen. They were led initially by the mighty warrior king Sargon the Great, who I'm sure you have heard of, and his line continued his tradition of being powerful warrior rulers that would absolutely dominate the Fertile Crescent for several hundred years. Akkad itself was probably a northern Sumerian city-state, though the exact location isn't known. But Akkadian has some Semitic roots to its language, indicating that maybe they were a separate people who came to the Sumerian region and established their own city-state within it. Just to give you an idea of how impressive Sargon was, in 50 years, he won 34 wars and lost 0, at least by the accounts that we have. Akkad believed themselves to have conquered the entire world, titling their kings as ruler of the 4 quarters. The empire probably hit its peak somewhere around 2200s or so BC, but by 2100 BC it had mostly collapsed, leaving Sumerian beliefs and practices across the known world from where Akkad had spread them, meaning that we see a lot of Sumerian influences as far away as Anatolia, even hundreds of years later in the archaeological record. The vacuum left by Akkad's collapse was inherited by a couple of smaller Sumerian states that succeeded it up until the Elamite invasions of about 2000 BC, which left Sumeria occupied for a couple of hundred years, bringing us beyond the time frame that I have semi-arbitrarily set for this particular build. So in summary, Sumeria and Akkad were massive influences on any inheritor to the throne of the Fertile Crescent, particularly Babylon and Assyria, who would rise over the following millennia and then have a neo-revival, both of them, in the first millennia BC there afterwards. And both Babylonian and Assyrian religion and society bore many striking resemblances to earlier Sumerian and Akkadian societies. In fact, Babylon even retained knowledge of reading and writing Sumerian as like a courtly or scribal language. They valued their influence so greatly. So in summary, incredibly important and prominent cultures. Though of note, are you paying attention? Good, I'm glad you are. While Babylon and Assyria are super duper cool, this build only focuses on Sumer and Akkad. Specifically, pretty much anything pre-2000 BC is fair game. It will not be including any elements from Babylon or Assyria, besides things that are kind of common across all of them, which there are many things. And I should note that some of the myths that we know from Sumeria are of Babylonian origin, like they were transcribed and kept in Babylonian libraries and similar, but I tried to limit myself to the myths that seem to have had older origins and were just being like transcribed by the Babylonians. But again, it's impossible to know for sure where a lot of these stories originated from precisely. I do plan on having a Babylon/Assyria build at some point in the future if you guys want to see it. And there are a lot of big omissions from this build that I'm specifically saving for that one. Sumer and Akkad are also, of note, much more similar to each other than either of them were to later Babylon or Assyria, though, of course, all of them are deeply interconnected. And some of the cuts that I had to make for this culture really, really hurt. There are, like, some really important gods that I just couldn't fit into this pantheon, but I will be including in the Babylon/Assyria build down the line. I did try to base all of these cuts on some sort of evidence that, like, a certain god was more important to Babylon, Assyria than it was to Sumer, Akkad. But a lot of these are like guesses and are kind of tenuous at best. And I'm going to be going over the biggest misses at the very end of this presentation, talking a bit about my plans for them going forward into the future. Moving on from history to mythology, let's do a quick summary of the beliefs of the Sumerians. First of all, they believed that the sky and earth, An and Ki, were the primordial ancestors of their gods, and via them, mankind. In a couple of their traditions, even An and Ki have ancestors, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole for now. The children of An and Ki became the 7 main gods of Sumeria, the Anunnaki, children of An and Ki. And from these 7 main gods, all the other great gods were born. Before their children were born, An and Ki were said to have been fused together, and the earth was therefore uninhabitable for any kind of life. Their eldest son split them apart once he reached maturity, leaving An to carry off the heavens as his own domain, and leaving Ki as the domain of the gods and their later progeny, letting the earth become habitable effectively. This differs from later Babylonian accounts where they have Tiamat and Abzu as the parents of the gods, though they and their monstrous spawn were definitely present in Sumeria as well. Tiamat and Abzu are like relatively well known in the modern zeitgeist, but are definitely more of like a later development in terms of their primacy, so I decided to leave them out of this build in large part, though their spawn are going to be appearing as myth units. From here we move to the creation of man. After several eons pass, whatever, the gods are having a great time, and there's many generations of gods, but discontent is brewing amongst them. The younger gods are subservient to the elder gods, and they're having to constantly work and labor and toil, while their elders are having these lavish, comfortable lifestyles and lording it over them. And so they are starting to rebel. And as a compromise, the gods decide to make new subordinates that can serve all of them. And this would, of course, be man. Wei Ilu, the god of intelligence, offers himself as a sacrifice, and from his flesh and his mind, plus clay from Ki the earth, 7 men and 7 women are formed, and from them are born all of the men and women of earth. So, now that we have that idea of a Sumerian cosmology, how does this actually manifest in terms of their day-to-day beliefs? Well, they saw humankind as the servants of the gods, and fearful servants at that. Gods could be harsh masters. The way we know in cuneiform texts what individuals are represented as gods or divine beings is by this symbol called the dingir. And because of this dingir symbol, we can see that there were actually quite a lot of characters that the Sumerians classified as gods. And because of that, many different forces and spirits they were subservient to. Most gods ended up becoming tethered to one or more city-states via major temples, but often the important ones had like a home city that was super duper important to them. And several gods might call the same city their home. This also meant that when city-states went to war, it was like believed to represent their patron gods, like actually having a dispute and fighting, which I thought was really cool. Now, while metaphysical and often anthropomorphized, gods were represented by physical idols within their temple, like literal statues. And these idols were not only sacrificed to, of course, but were clothed and clean and paraded around and escorted to events, brought to the battlefield, brought to other cities for diplomacy. They were effectively treated like actual royalty, if not better. And so the Sumerians were serious about being servants to their gods, even if the gods were represented just as these statues. And the gods were kind of represented among the people by priests, who wielded enormous power and were functionally kings and queens themselves. Now, a quick note on naming conventions here. In this build, I am mostly going to be using Sumerian names, but pretty much everything I talk about will also have like a different Akkadian name as well, so your mileage may vary. Babylon and Assyria would also rename almost all of these characters on top of that, so there's a decent chance you might have heard of one of these characters under a different name at some point. I've also simplified many names for pronounceability. With that, let's move on to an overview of this civilization, the core major mechanics. Of note, though, this build will not be touching upon any sort of campaign stuff whatsoever. Let me know down below if you ever want me to talk about that someday. Beginning with broad changes, some like broad strokes differences between this culture and others in the game. So first of all, Sumeria can be summarized as having large armies of weak units. The individual stats of all of their units, human and myth, average out to be a little worse than other cultures. Not like terrible, but a little bit worse. However, their units tend to take less population space than those of other cultures, with several even taking less than 1 population space. This, of course, references their huge population and relatively primitive military tech compared to the rest of the game's cultures. They also have a major need for food. Their units, technologies, etc. tend to cost much more food than other cultures, while wood, on the other hand, is kind of de-emphasized in their costs. A huge surplus of food was, of course, what let Sumerian population boom, and its complex society be supported. On the other hand, though, while prosperous, it had poor access to good hardwoods. In fact, when Gilgamesh famously went to like the cedar forest of Lebanon and fought Humbaba. One of the reasons that he went to the cedar forest, and it was seen as this like paradisiacal place, and he brought back the cedar trees as a trophy, was because that was like some of the best hardwood the Sumerians could even have conceived of. And importing Lebanese hardwood would have been an enormous luxury and commodity. Another major broad strokes overview of Sumeria is its emphasis on infantry armies. It does have ranged units, but they are slightly more niche and not nearly like their core, and their cavalry is limited entirely to chariots, which are tough, but clunky and slow. With broad changes out of the way, let's talk about some of the differences to their generic buildings. Their town center, for example. It's an extremely important building to the Civ, much more emphasized than in others. As with the Atlanteans, they can build them in Archaic Age. They cost way less than other civilizations, with a bigger emphasis on food. But for each town center you already have, their cost increases. They cannot build drop camps whatsoever. And their unique temple, the ziggurat, is limited by the number of town centers you have. You can only have one ziggurat per TC. However, any resource a Sumerian worker drops at a TC is flat increased by 10%. You have like 10 food in your villager's carry capacity, they drop off 11. A new food magically appears, helping compensate for the long walks they're going to have to be taking. And moreover, whenever you age up, the TC researching the age up will become patronized by the god you choose, unlocking a unique bonus for that TC specifically, which should allow for some really unique custom strategizing when you are expanding out over the map and deciding where you want to put these special bonuses as you are settling new lands. I will be covering specific patronage bonuses in the god sections later, and your starting TC is automatically patronized by your major god. Other thing of note, stone walls. They are available in Archaic Age. You cannot build wooden walls as the Sumerians. And stone walls are cheaper for them than for other civs, but take considerably longer to build. The fortified wall upgrade is also available for them in Classical Age. From here, let's talk about heroes, the fun part, the heart of a civilization, beginning with the NC. The NC is a support hero trained when you build a ziggurat, spawned when you build a ziggurat for free. And if it's killed, another one may be trained at that same ziggurat. You can only have one per ziggurat, and they're like tethered to that ziggurat. An NC can be either male or female, just like a laborer unit. They have bad combat stats, but are like reasonably tanky. They have divine damage for their ranged attack, which deals like almost nothing to humans, but it's pretty good versus myth units, so they're kind of priest-like in that regard. And as a special power, they can empower another hero at significant range, greatly boosting combat stats and rapidly healing that hero. But again, only heroes. They also serve as a drop point, kind of like an ox cart, representing them like collecting taxes and offerings. And dropped resources that your laborers give to an NC are converted into favor. Though this effect is toggleable, I'll get more into favor shortly. The NC were the high priests of a city, who also served as their kings in earlier times. Like I said, they were a god's representative within a city-state, and as such, held great authority. Second hero, the Lugal. The Lugal is a melee infantry hero trained at the town center in Classical Age and has a parallel production queue, like was recently established for Greek heroes. They're cheap, but they have a pretty long training time, and you can only have one per town center, just like the NC with ziggurats. The Lugal has a battle cry effect, identical to Arcantos, but with like lower range and total attack buff, because I've heard the Arcantos battle cry is actually broken. And moreover, any enemy building destroyed near a Lugal grants the user some resources, mostly food, a little gold, and then a tiny bit of wood, scaling on the cost of that building, representing them overseeing pillaging operations and carting back loot to their home city. Lugal were war leaders or war kings that would lead the military of a city-state. Originally only appointed in time of war, they eventually became a higher rank than the NC and kind of worked alongside the NC as co-rulers of a city, each one functioning within a different sphere. They were probably recruited from noble families initially, but eventually started to form their own dynasties and became more permanent institutions. Now to talk about favor. The Sumerian favor mechanic is offerings. Both the NC and the ziggurat serve as drop points, and both have a toggleable effect that, when activated, makes any resource dropped at them turn into favor. You can turn this on and off at will whenever you want. This is done at worse than a 1-to-1 ratio. Wood is the least valuable, like 10 wood might get you a point something favor. then food would be next most valuable, and gold would be most valuable. But this would force the players to like pamper their gods, giving them a lot of cool gifts and stuff at the expense of their economy. Though the extra resources you get for free from dropping at a TC should, I hope, compensate for the resources that you lose generating favor through the offering mechanic. Either way, I think it would be very cool. Now from here, let us move on to mortals, the human side of the Sumerian civilization, beginning with their unique buildings. They have quite a few, and if I don't mention it here, or I didn't mention it earlier, assuming they have the default option for any given building. Beginning with the ziggurat, it's a very important building for them. It is an archaic age temple equivalent that also serves as a universal drop point and researches all food eco-techs. Resources dropped here can generate favor, like I mentioned just now. And the ziggurat is larger, take longer to build, and it's more expensive than a temple, but it's tankier, and it also has a better work rate when it's training like myth units and stuff. You can only make one ziggurat per town center. A ziggurat can also be tiered up. Every time you age up past archaic, you can tier up a ziggurat plus 1 time. So if you're in Mythic Age, you can tier it up 3 times. You task villagers to individually upgrade the ziggurat, which would like overlay a new building scaffolding on top of the existing building while they make it bigger. And doing so permanently upgrades the ziggurat's HP, favor and resource returns, and work rate to a decent degree, allowing it to be a pretty substantial eco building if you put resources into it. Second building is the Tibira. This is an archaic age armory equivalent that also researches wood and gold eco-techs. It is still a prerequisite for the heroic age, even if you build it in archaic. The Tibira is not a drop point of note, and it's cheaper than other armories. It's even able to research the copper military technologies in archaic age, a reference to the Sumerians being some of the first people to use copper tools and weapons. And it also researches building HP techs instead of the town center. A Tibira was like a type of craftsman, specializing in metal, wood, and statuary tools. It's a term I came across in a glossary of Sumerian words. And it will give the Sumerians a very different build path when they're thinking about how to tech up their units and economy at the same time, saving them some resources overall. Next building is the Ugnim. This is an archaic age core military building. It's available an age earlier than most other barracks equivalents, but it has very limited offerings until classical age. The name translates roughly to encampment, and besides it being available an age early, it is a reasonably generic barracks equivalent. More unique buildings, the Nagaru. The Nagaru is a classical age secondary military building training cavalry, chariots, and siege weapons. It is pretty expensive, and the name translates roughly to carpenter. Like I said, the Sumerians didn't have a ton of like good hardwood, but they had plenty of uses for it when they came across it, and also used other materials like reeds, grasses, and smaller scrubby trees. Last unique building, the Egal. The Egal is the heroic age fortress equivalent. You must place the foundation for an Egal over an existing town center, replacing the town center in the process. This retains all town center functions, training villagers, aging up, everything, while gaining all fortress functions as well. Training fortress units, shooting much quicker, better HP, etc., and has scaled up HP and firepower to match other fortresses while also having better range than a generic fortress as well, to compensate for you being forced to put it in very specific locations. The Egal has a better work rate than any fortress or town center building in the game, to compensate for it needing to do the work of both. The Egal also enjoys further boosted resource yields, maybe something like plus 20 or even 25% versus the TC's 10, and benefits in full from fortified town center, gaining the same upgrades that a TC would have in its state. So in summary, a very powerful building that forces Sumerian base building into very specific and often rather predictable patterns. Next, let's talk about their military units, beginning with the Nim. The Nim is their core archer unit. It is an extremely light slinger trained at the Ugnim from Archaic Age. It serves as your starting scout, so you begin with one, and has decent speed and line of sight, and is dirt cheap, quick to train, and takes only 1 population space, but has absolutely doo-doo damage and very low HP. It has worse training time, range, and damage until Classical Age, kind of like a scout unit in Age of Empires 2. And the name translates roughly to like gnat or fly. This was a term that was actually used to refer to like light skirmishing units in warfare who weren't expected to do much damage, but mostly screen your more elite troops and annoy the enemy while also scouting out their actions. The second Sumerian unit is the Geshukur. This is a core infantry unit trained at the Ugnim in Classical Age, and is a long spear infantry. It has a little worse speed and HP, and is pretty vulnerable to archers, but it can attack from a slight range, like the Kamayuk in Age of Empires 2. It also has a bonus versus cavalry. This, plus the Nim and the next unit, constitute like the core Sumerian army comp. And there are quite a few depictions of Sumerian and Akkadian soldiers using these long spears in like proto-phalanx formations, often with a shield bearer at their very front. And speaking of which, the Igbur is a heavy counter-infantry unit trained at the Ugnim in Classical Age as well. It is a mace infantryman with a very big shield. It's slow, doesn't have great DPS, but it's extremely tanky and is very good versus pierce damage. It also has a bonus versus archers. The Igbur will block ranged attacks for allies directly behind them, redirecting the damage onto itself, kind of like a Hussite wagon in AoE 2, but it actually takes the hit for its ally, and because it's great against pierce attacks, that means that those attacks are going to be doing much less damage. So you place a line of Igbur in front of your Geshukur, who can stab over them, and you have yourself a pretty solid core infantry army comp, especially with Nim being obnoxious in the background. The Igbur will always stand at the front of a formation when grouped. Now, from here we get to some more advanced units, the Shubur. The Shubur is a ranged cavalry unit trained at the Nagaru in Classical Age. It is a light charioteer with throwing clubs. It's quick, it's tanky for a ranged cav, but it's slow to train and it doesn't have great damage output. It has a small bonus versus infantry and a notably high wood cost and low gold cost. The name translates roughly to chariot, and is a specific type of chariot called a straddle cart. Sumerian chariots came in a couple of varieties, and one of the lightest and presumably easiest to build ones didn't have a platform to you to stand on. They had a saddle that you would splay your legs across and kind of hold on for dear life while the onagers pulling the thing kind of just rushed wherever they wanted to go. The Shubur's throwing clubs were also known to Sumeria pretty extensively. These were called waspum, and they were normally a sidearm, but I thought they were cool enough to become the main weapon for this kind of wonky unit. Next military unit, the Erin. The Erin is a sapper team trained at the Ugnim in Heroic Age. They're extremely cheap. They take only one pop. Yeah, there's two guys, but still one pop. And they can build walls and towers. They have very bad damage, though, but a very substantial bonus versus buildings. Moreover, they gradually build a siege ramp as they attack a building, like a big mound of sloped earth. Which makes the building take more damage from melee attacks and reduces its work rate and attack rates. So effectively, you can imagine these sapper teams developing ramps for their allies to climb up and more effectively beat down the enemies, while also encasing the enemies in their own buildings as they are fighting. I thought it was a cool way to implement dirt siege ramps into this build, since that was the most common way siege warfare was conducted for a very substantial portion of the early history of the world. I should note that the siege ramp is a very substantial debuff when maxed out and has a little graphic. And so as your Erin are fighting, the ramp graphic will get bigger and bigger to show the effect size. And it would cap out almost disabling the building if the Erin are left untouched. If the building is repaired, the ramp would be gradually removed. The name roughly translates to forced laborer, usually in a military context. Another military unit, the Gishgigir. This is another chariot unit trained at the Nagaru in Castle Age. It is a heavy charioteer armed with a spear. It's very tanky, but it's slow and it doesn't have awesome damage. Unlike the straddle carts, these ones actually give you a platform to stand on with a nice little bulwark in front so that the rider would be protected. They have a good bonus versus infantry, a notably high wood cost and low gold cost like the Shubur, and they can transport up to 2 units regardless of pop. I should note human foot units. And these human foot units can attack out of the Gishgigir without revealing themselves, meaning that if you stick to Nim in a Gishgigir, the Gishgigir will just be flinging sling stones as it is driving and attacking. The Nim or whatever else you garrison inside would be completely protected from git damage until the Gishgigir is destroyed. Heroes could garrison in one as well. Now onto some more advanced military units. The Ugula. This is an elite cavalry unit trained at the Égal in Heroic Age. It is a chariot-riding captain armed with a sickle sword. Pretty good stats, but they're expensive, and you can only have so many of them. They provide an aura to nearby human soldiers, modestly buffing speed and damage. But when nearby enemies die within the aura, the Ugula will gain experience, eventually promoting to a Nubanda and then a Shagina. This boosts their stats, and more notably, majorly boosts the aura effect. So if you can promote an Ugula and keep it alive all the way up to Shagina, then it can substantially improve the damage output of your army. I should note these auras do not stack. And upon reaching Shagina, the Ugula becomes a hero, getting a big bonus versus myth units, and becoming resurrectable when killed. Pretty freaking cool. And these are all Sumerian military ranks, if that much wasn't obvious, that were later translated into the Akkadian military as well. Another unit, the Shublugal. This is an elite infantry trained at the Égal in Heroic Age. It's an axe and shield infantry with heavy armor. It's tanky, but it's slow and pretty expensive with not great stats for its cost. Its attacks ignore melee armor, giving it great DPS and hard countering heavy units, but is not cost effective versus most light units. It gets bonus benefits from the Ugula's aura, including health regen. All other heroes also count as providing the Ugula's aura at Shagina level for the Shublugal only, meaning that you want to be clustering your Shublugal around your heroes as like elite bodyguards who become great stats instead of mediocre stats, get health regen, and also can rip through heavy armored enemies, making them just absolute linebackers if you can get the comp together. Shublugal were like elite soldiers, like a cast of royal retainers whose name translates directly to slaves or servants of the king. Next, the Gusidili. This is a melee siege unit trained at the Nagaru in Mythic Age. It is a large covered battering ram, very big, all but immune to arrow fire and very tanky. It cannot attack units, but of course can eat buildings alive, and only costs food and wood, despite being very powerful. It can garrison up to 10 units, improving attack and speed, just like an Age of Empires 2 ram. Of note, this can only garrison human foot soldiers. I think heroes would be able to do it as well. When garrisoned by Erin specifically, the Gushidili will build siege ramps while attacking, as though the Erin itself were doing so, which I think is a pretty cool combo. Of note, I'm really not happy with the art I used for this. If anyone can find like a Sumerian battering ram, that would be awesome. We do know that Sumerians used battering rams. Gushidili actually translates to battering ram, and they're referenced in sources. We just have no idea what they looked like. And lastly, for military units, the Lugeshban. The Lugeshban is an elite archer unit trained at the Égal in Mythic Age. It's a composite bowman with great range, good damage. It's expensive and slow to train, but its other stats are all decent, even HP and armor. It's just an all-around good unit, no gimmicks, just strong endgame unit. Lugeshban was the Akkadian word for like foot archer, and the composite bow transformed Sumerian military forever. It was probably brought in via nomads coming in from the east just after Sargon, and it just changed the game completely. His grandson, Nadam Sin, was the one who seems to have pioneered the use of these weapons, and it's because of his forwarding of the composite bow that Akkad was able to retain such unbelievable military might for so long across such a humongous region, despite frequent rebellions threatening to undermine it. So because of that, the capstone unit of the Sumerian human army is a composite bowman. Next, to briefly touch upon the Navy, we have the Adir. This would be the arrow ship, which translates roughly to ferry to ferry, simplified from the term Ma'adir. The Tukulum should be the bonker ship. The word Tukulum is Akkadian and probably had something to do with ships, we don't really know, which is a perfect fit for a stupid unit type that shouldn't be in the game. And lastly, we have the Magur, and the Magur is a siege ship. Magur were like deep water ceremonial barges, or as deep water as the Sumerians can get it. They had pretty sophisticated shipbuilding technology and were known to transport armies for long distances across the Persian Gulf, but we're definitely going to have to be a little fantastical to justify their ships being anywhere near the quality of the Greeks or the Egyptians, or especially the Norse. From here, let's talk a bit about other units, particularly eco units, beginning with the Gurush. The Gurush is the villager unit. It takes up less than one population, probably 0.9 or something, and of course comes in male and female variety. It's pretty much identical to normal, with a little bit less HP, and the name translates roughly to male serf, or able-bodied man. Female ones, if we wanted to be pedantic, could be called geme. which means like the exact same thing but for women. I think it would be kind of cool if they had different names, just to get a little bit more etymological flavor in there. And lastly, the Anshe Barala. This is the Sumerian trade unit, also taking less than 1 population and with slightly less HP, again like 0.9 of a population. Its name translates to pack ass. Onagers, which is an equid related to like horses and donkeys, were the main pack animals in Sumeria and even pulled their chariots, though very unwillingly and with a lot of cajoling. And I should note the Sumerians did also use oxen, but they were much slower and more commonly employed in domestic settings like farm labor. So I thought both to get more animal diversity in the game, and because they probably would have been what were used for like merchant caravanning and stuff, the onager was a better fit. For a more conventional name than Anshe Barala, you could use onager caravan, but I think that is boring. And with that, we move on to the exciting stuff. For those who skipped ahead here, welcome. It's time for Major Gods. Beginning with the Big Daddy, Enlil. Now, Enlil matches the trope of the Sky Father, recurrent across much of Indo-European mythology. He was the king of the gods born of An, the primordial heavens, and Ki, the primordial earth, and he was the one who separated them to make the world habitable. He was largely portrayed as fatherly and like a benefactor to mankind. He invented agriculture for man, an exception to this being when he killed all of humanity in the Deluge myth, which has its roots in Sumeria and earlier. But Enlil was largely the patron of rulership and held the final word among gods. Other gods couldn't even look at him, just as mortals could not look upon them, so great was his radiant aura. Enlil also, notably as like a side note, seduced his wife Ninlil by taking various forms, which is the first known example of shapeshifting in myth. Pretty cool. Let's talk about his god bonuses. First of all, aging up is 33% faster. He was the enabler of civilization. This also fits in being the father of the gods, because you know, you're picking gods when you age up. Second of all, training heroes is instantaneous. He is the sole bestower of divine right to rule. The word Enlilutu roughly translates to Enlilship and was synonymous to some degree with rulership with additional religious connotations. Next bonus, myth units deal bonus damage against buildings. He was seen as a destroyer as well as a provider. In one text, he was said to have annihilated the land, silenced the city. And that sounds to me like he's good at destroying buildings, hence this bonus. Next, all units refund 40% of original favor cost on death. He was described as the Lord of Destinies. His command, unalterable. Also, the word Lil, that forms part of his name, has kind of an interesting ambiguous meaning that might have something to do with fate or some other sort of religious connotation. And lastly, his patronage bonus. Your starting town center has the following. Farms adjacent to this town center cost minus 40%. He was the patron of farming, called the Lord of Abundance, and gave mankind the first matic, the tool that enabled farming for much of early humanity. So of course is very powerful, but remember, it only applies to your starting town center, and when I say adjacent, I mean the farm has to be like touching the TC, so only your first ring of farms get this discount. Quite powerful. Next, let's talk about Enlil's other things. His god power is called Decree Fate. Target-friendly unit becomes invulnerable for a few seconds, completely invulnerable. It has double duration when you target a myth unit, and triple duration when you target a hero. If you repeat it, it has like a middling repeat cost and a low cooldown. Like I said, very fittingly, Enlil is called the Decreer of Fates, and he holds the Tablet of Destinies, an artifact that gives him supreme control over the world, though a couple of myths actually have him losing this precious artifact. Chaos always ensuing their following. His unique tech is called Melam. This is researched at the Ziggurat and gives heroes and myth units bonus armor as their HP gets lower. Melam was a divine substance that gave gods their glorious aura, but it was also used by some god-adjacent creatures. And since Enlil is known for his overpowering Melam as compared to other gods, it only makes sense that he be the one to convey it to your heroes and myth units. Like I said, other gods couldn't even look at him. Enlil's wonder would be Ekur, which was the name of the House of the Gods. It may have also been an actual temple, but mostly it is referenced in myth as kind of a Mount Olympus-like dwelling beyond mortal comprehension. If you want to see some tabled ideas that I had for Enlil, feel free to look on screen right now. We have finite time and are already going way too deep into this, so I'm going to skip over them for now. Moving on to the next major god, ya boy, Enki. If Enlil is equivalent to Zeus, then Enki is equivalent to Prometheus. He is the lord of fresh water, presiding over Abzu, the primordial subterranean freshwater sea that the Sumerians conceived of in their cosmology, who also was the husband of Tiamat. Freshwater personified to mate with her, saltwater personified. Enki is of ambiguous origins. He might be a son of Anu, or Abzu itself even, and he was the patron of wisdom, arts, and sciences, the achievements of civilization, whereas Enlil is the enabler of civilization. Medicine, law, magic, he did it all, and he was the closest friend to mankind, building them from clay like Prometheus, educating them, and even saving them from the deluge, such that they might live on to serve the gods. He did, however, stop humans from becoming immortal in the famous myth of Adapa. He was known for purification, exorcism, and especially fertility. He had a lot of amorous trysts and a bajillion children. Enki's god bonuses would be as such. First, start with +2 gurush, but -100 food. The Chinese start, kind of, from Age of Empires 2. Enki sculpted the first human, Adapa, from clay, and he was the one who initiated the idea of creating mankind to serve the gods, and as such, starting with bonus villagers seems perfect for him. Economic texts are available an age earlier and cost -33% food. Again, AoE 2 players will recognize this one. Enki was the patron of arts and sciences, and as such, economic texts are right up his alley. This also kind of links into his fertility theme due to the food discount and also focusing on eco. Next, the Egbur, the Mace Man, and Shublugal, the elite infantry, briefly slow their targets when they attack, especially myth units. This is in reference to the first man, Adapa, breaking the wings of the south wind. Kind of a funky story, but in summary, Enki then saves him from Enlil, and I felt like this kind of hamstringing effect would be a cool effect to put on some of your heavier infantry units and really give Enki's soldiers something unique to do. Next, his patronage bonus. He only has 3 god bonuses because they're so good, but his patronage bonus, friendly human units near this town center are slowly healed. Enki was the healer, the purifier, the bringer of sweet water. And as such, he's got to have a healing effect in there somewhere. This build has a lot of healing on it, just as a warning. Next, to talk more about Enki. His god power is called Clay Turtle, which might sound kind of funky, but it's a direct reference to an interesting myth. Target enemy is immobilized for a short period, taking minor gradual damage. Imagine the earth like forming into like a snapping turtle's jaw and just go clank onto the unit. They can't move, they take damage over time. Targets with higher max HP are held slightly longer, incentivizing you to use this on high value myth units and similar. It has a low repeat cost and cooldown, so you can spam this thing. And in the myth, Ninurta and the Turtle, Enki makes a clay turtle to trap the hero god after he gets kind of too big for his britches. And as such, since Ninurta is an incredibly powerful and prominent character, it made sense to me that this turtle would be more obnoxious on more powerful targets. You can even grab enemy heroes with this thing. Now, his unique tech is called Sacred Mace. This would be researched at the Ziggurat, and you'd gain a little favor for each technology you research, including retroactively. The sacred mace were divine decrees guarded by Enki. These were a really interesting concept. It's like a mix of laws and social norms and virtues and practices and a bunch of other things besides, and they were used as like the basis of Sumerian society, the kind of guiding light of Sumerian day-to-day and more like esoteric life. And they were entirely the domain of Enki. Enki's wonder would be called Abzu, which is the name of an actual temple of his, very, very prominent temple within Sumeria. I forget which city off the top of my head, but if you want to see some other tabled ideas I have for the god, take a look on screen right now. And with that out of the way, we move on to the final major god, ya girl, Inanna. Wow, where to even start with Inanna? She's one of the most interesting mythological figures I can think of. She is the goddess of love and war, embodied by the planet Venus, coincidentally. She's a really nuanced character. Her behavior changes quite wildly from one story to another, and there's many interpretations for this, but I choose to take this as meaning that she's just a very complex person who had very big feelings. She also had ambiguous origins. She might have been the daughter of Anu, or Nana, the moon god, or Enki, but most notably of all, she was a hypersexual person. She had many lovers, and almost all of them met a very ugly end after she gets bored of them and discards of them. Notably, she tried to seduce Gilgamesh, and he rejected her, resulting in a whole lot of grief for everyone involved. But Inanna was more than just a hornball. She was a legitimizer of kings. And there was a ritual, like, wedding process to her when kings took office. They were the husband of Inanna, and their marriage to her legitimized their rulership. Her war patronage was less prominent than her love patronage, and fertility in general, until the days of Akkad, under the name Ishtar, which you're probably very familiar with. But she did have plenty to do with war even well before Akkad. And she has always been associated with power and ambition above all else. She's very, very ambitious and is one of the most common, recurrent, and important characters in all of Sumerian mythology. God, she's just so cool. I could do a whole video about Inanna alone. Let's talk about her god bonuses. First of all, destroying an enemy town center gives you a free use of their major god's power. This is about usurpation and conquest of other gods. She famously stole the sacred mace from her maybe father Enki after getting him drunk, and refused to give them back unless he agreed to let her keep a couple of them. She also tried to conquer the underworld from her sister Ereshkigal. She was, again, she was ambitious. She got up to a lot of shit. Next bonus. Your god powers cool down faster as your units fight. One source I found had the quote in Sumerian, "Battle is a feast to her." She has more myth appearances than any other god, so it would make sense that you'd be able to spam your god powers more. Her influence would be felt more if your units were fighting especially. Next, on death, your heroes spawn a lion. This would work kind of like a lion of Set. Or a lion spawned with that one relic. Inanna had many lovers, many of whom were famous heroes, and pretty much all of them died. And the lion was her symbol, and so because of that, like a lion coming out on death of a hero, that feels pretty Inanna to me. Next, your Ugula, the captain unit in a chariot who ranks up, gain twice as much experience, and their auras are 33% larger. Inanna is the kindler of ambition, the patron of social climbing and charisma, and as such it makes sense that your aspiring captains would advance faster under her watchful eye. Lastly, her patronage bonus, soldiers recruited from this Egal, remember town centers promote into Egals, have plus 15% attack. Pretty substantial, but only out of one Egal. War, especially during Akkad, was Inanna's bread and butter, as well as rulership and authority. Hence, attack bonus coming from the Egal, the seat of rulership. Let's talk about some of her other stuff. Her god power, well, have you guys been paying attention? Of course, it's got to be seduce. Inanna takes control of an enemy unit for a brief period, only like 10 seconds or something like that. You cannot delete the unit. Heroes are affected for double the length, meaning that if you seduce an enemy hero, you can get some good use out of it. Seduce has a low repeat cost, but a mid cooldown. So you want to spam it, but remember, your god powers cool down faster if your units are fighting. I could see this god power being like very overpowered, and so maybe you put like another restriction on it, like the seduced target can't go too far away from their other allies, so you can't just like run them back into your army and then kill them after they become unseduced. I don't know. Like I said, Inanna does this constantly, so you kind of have to have it as her god power. Her unique technology is Harimtu. This is researched at the Ziggurat. Anytime you train a hero, it spawns a Gurush/Geme for free, so you get free villagers out of this. Harimtu roughly translates to harlot, or maybe like a priestess to do with eroticism or something. These were extremely closely associated with Inanna. And prostitution, maybe taking the form of like some sort of social convention rather than like a paid exchange of services, seems to have been a big part in Sumerian religion and culture more broadly, even if we don't know a ton about it. All that we do know, though, is that Inanna definitely presided over all of these practices. Inanna's wonder would be Eanna, which was her temple, another extremely important and large one. And if you want to see some tabled ideas I had for Inanna, take a look on screen right now. God, I have no idea how long this video is, but I'm betting it's getting close to an hour. So let's move on ever so swiftly to part 5, minor gods. We have our majors. Let's look at who we have next. Myth units will be discussed in full in the next section after this one. Let's start with our classical age gods, beginning with Nidaba. She is focused on technology. She is the goddess of grain, but more notably the goddess of writing and scribes. She was possibly a child of An, or Enlil, or Enki. Often in Sumerian myth, gods have like a bajillion different origins. She was the mother of Ninlil, who was Enlil's wife, which could be very, very weird. And she was also the grandmother of Gilgamesh. While we don't have any good physical descriptions of Nidaba or like depictions in art, she was very important. She was referenced often in scrolls scribal works and actually had cults into the Seleucid period. That's like 2,000 years after Sumeria. Wow, very, very impactful. We have a lot of examples in the archaeological record of like scholarly works and writing ending with Nidaba Za-mi, praise be to Nidaba. And so her influence within like the scribal sphere was enormous. Her patronage bonus is that this town center emits an aura, improving nearby building research rates by 25%. Technology, technology, technology. She is available to both Enlil and Enki. Now, her myth unit we'll be getting into a little later, but that's what it looks like on screen. And her god power is called Selenize. Enemy farms cannot be gathered from, and new ones cannot be built. Users' farmers work at 50% rate, so it's reverse rain. The duration is similar to rain and has a mid-repeat cost but a high cooldown, so you can't spam it too much because it would be pretty overwhelming if you could. Soil salinization, namely like salt crystals forming and salt becoming concentrated in the soil, was a huge problem for the Fertile Crescent and was likely a big cause of Sumeria's decline over time, especially after the Elamite invasions. Her first unique technology is called lexical lists. Researched at the Ziggurat, you gain access to another Sumerian classical god's technologies. All of them, and you get to choose which one. Your allies gain access to Nidaba's other god technologies. Ooh, such implications! I think this one will be super fun and let you really customize builds. But it's expensive, of course, because the technology doesn't do anything by itself. Lexical lists were these extensive glossaries preserving the Sumerian language for posterity. It's one of the reasons we know so much about Sumeria, is we have these like Rosetta Stones just littered everywhere. They even include translations to foreign equivalents, which is just unbelievable. They're such a valuable scholarly and like archaeological tool, and of course they fit perfectly for Nidaba. Next unique tech, Eduba. This is researched at the town center, or Egal, and it makes town centers and Egals work 15% faster. Scribal schools. The Eduba was the House of Tablets, a place for young folk, probably of higher social status, to learn to read and write and enter the bureaucracy as government officials, scribes, and archivists. And of course, the Eduba were heavily patronized by Nidaba, as well as her maybe father Enki. Last unique tech, cuneiform. This is researched at the town center. Farms are gathered from 10% faster. Cuneiform is the first writing system in history, obviously, and it very likely initially evolved from agricultural accounting practices. You know, like, this guy brought in this much grain, and then over time that evolves into this beautiful, complex language. And of course it would have to be Nidaba who deals with that. From Nidaba, we move on to Ninkasi. She's in a very different direction. She is focused on chariots and infantry. Ninkasi was the goddess of beer and drunkenness, also linked to cooking, grain, and even the underworld. There's a couple other Sumerian deities to do with beer and brewing, like Siris and Shiduri and Patindu, and I'm kind of lumping all of them together in this portrayal of Ninkasi. Some hypothesize that she, or maybe some of these other beer goddesses, might be like alter egos of Inanna, but that's speculative. Ninkasi was a child of Enki and a fixture of Enlil's court. She represents both the pros and cons of alcohol, so she's nuanced, you might say. Her patronage bonus is that while idle, this town center generates a substantial trickle of food. She do be brewing, and she is available to both Enlil and Inanna. Her myth unit we will get into later, but her god power is called Gishbun. Units in an area become drunk, dealing more melee damage but moving slower and hurting all nearby for a small amount whenever they attack. So if your enemy has a big fat clump of infantry, you make them all drunk and they start hurting their friends as they're trying to hurt you and kind of trudging around at a slower pace. This would have kind of a low-mid duration, maybe a little less than some like flaming weapons. It'd have a middling repeat cost and a middling cooldown. Gishbun translates to party, and people getting hammered was, of course, Ninkasi's specialty. You can even use this on your own guys if you are feeling brave and think you can spread them out enough to not accidentally wreck yourself. Her first unique technology is the game of 20 squares. This is researched at the Nagaru, and it makes chariot units move 10% faster. Every 7th one you train is free. The Royal Game of Ur. If you haven't heard about it, look it up. It is the first known board game, a game of luck and skill. It's been reconstructed by archaeologists. It's playable today. You can play it online right now. And Ninkasi is, above all other gods, associated with board games, even this one. It's, of course, a tavern activity, and she was like the tavern person, right? She's even depicted with a game board in her hands. As for the effects, the game of 20 squares is a racing game, hence I felt Chariots Faster is good for it. And the 7th When You Train is free is in reference to how the game is played, because it's the number 7 is very important. You're trying to get pieces to the end of a racetrack, and you have 7 in total. Pretty cool reference, I think. Next tech is Kurun. Researched at Town Center, human units have +5 melee attack, +5 HP. Very small bonus, but applies to all of your human units. Kurun was the finest quality Sumerian beer. There are plenty of odes to it, and it's the crown jewels of Ninkasi's products. As fine quality beer, it makes sense it would be attack, but also it was described as enheartening and nourishing and refreshing. So attack and HP, making your units more robust, felt appropriate. Last unique tech is Aguba. This is researched at the Ziggurat, and it makes enemy myth units cost 20% more favor, so you're penalizing your opponent. Aguba was holy water. It's like a libation, quite probably of beer, that was used to ward off evil. I think it's a good link to Ninkasi. Also, it helps her emphasize human units more, because she's making your enemy myth units harder to get to. Last classical age minor god is Dumuzid. Dumuzid patronizes your Ugnim, so your barracks equivalent, as well as food. He is the god of shepherds and vegetation, responsible for the shifting of the seasons. He was the lover of Inanna, very famously taking her place in the underworld after her misadventure with her sister Ereshkigal. He was later shown mercy and allowed to emerge for 6 months out of the year, kind of the male Persephone, you might say, showing the changing of the seasons and causing him to be associated with the growing and withering of vegetation. He was maybe a child of Enki, but was also maybe an actual historical king who ascended to godhood, and he's associated with youth and young love and sometimes portrayed as a heroic young warrior. His patronage bonus is that this TC spawns 3 sheep, immediately once you patronize it with Dumuzid, and 3 more after each following age up. He is the god of shepherds. You gotta have sheep. He is available to Enki and Inanna. His myth unit, of course, we'll get to a little later, and his god power is Akitu. This replenishes the stockpiles of all food and wood resource nodes on the map. Felled trees regrow if unblocked. This means if you've only harvested your berry bushes down to 1, they go back to full. You have a decaying sheep that you are in the process of harvesting, goes back to full. Your trees that you've cut down, assuming they're not going to trap any units in, they grow back as well. Wow. And this is map wide, so if you coordinate with your team or your enemies are clever, they might be able to benefit from it too. Akitu has a low repeat cost, but a high cooldown, so you can only use it once in a while. Sumeria had 2 New Years, the spring and fall New Years, the sowing Akitu and the harvest Akitu. And both of these were, of course, inexorably connected to Dumuzid. His first unique tech is Alalu's Wing. It researched at the Ugnim makes so that every 6th Ugnim unit that dies respawns at the nearest Ugnim. When Gilgamesh was chewing out Inanna, he likened Dumuzid to an Alalu bird with a broken wing. Now, it's not really clear what an Alalu bird is, but the effect I've given to this tech ties into the death rebirth theming of Dumuzid, with 6 months per year spent in and out of the underworld, so every 6th Ugnim unit gets to respawn, namely come out of the underworld, or maybe go back in. His next unique tech is called Sipad. This is researched at the Ugnim, and it makes your Nim, your slingers, have slightly improved attack, speed, and line of sight. Slings have always been the preferred weapons of shepherds, and Sipad were head shepherds in charge of a lord's flock, as well as being an epithet of Dumuzid. And because of this, I feel altogether it makes sense for him to be able to buff your slinger units. Last unique tech, Gagur. This is researched at the town center. Your herdables generate a trickle of food more as they fatten and have double the fattening cap. Milk carrier is what Gagur means. Milk was a rare delicacy for Sumerians, and Dumuzid was the patron of milk. So much so that some of his epithets have to do with milk even. So this technology represents your herdables, giving you some milk over time and getting nice and plump under Dumuzid's watchful eye. On to the heroic age, beginning with Sirsir. Ciao is mostly to do with navy as well as heroes. He is the god of sailors, the boatman of Enki. He's not a well-attested god, but he has similarities to a bunch of other like sea and naval gods, such as Urshanabi, the ferryman you find in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and a couple others besides. There's also this recurrent motif in Sumerian art called the boat god motif that might be depicting Ciao. So I'm kind of lumping all this grounding together into this one god, even though he himself is not super well attested. Ciao was described as being respected by the demons of the sea, which, once you learn a little bit more about Sumerian demons, is a pretty substantial feat. His patronage bonus makes it so that heroes linked to this town center, namely the Lugal you train or the NC of the Ziggurat linked to it, can swim, making them fully amphibious. He is available to Enlil and Enki. His myth unit we will get into later, but in the meantime his god power is Deluge. The Deluge myth arrives. It steadily floods an area, damaging and throwing naval units around and trapping land units in place. They'd like flail helplessly in the water, dealing mild damage over time. This is not going to usually be enough to kill them, but it will like hold them hostage. Deluge has a mid duration, high repeat cost, high repeat cooldown. Enlil was definitely the source of the Deluge myth, but Ciao and company are definitely adjacent to it. And we can't let Enlil do everything. So as such, Ciao gets to be the one who brings the Deluge. His first unique tech is Adu Namtil. This makes your heroes gain plus 20% HP and slowly heal over time. And it is in reference to the boxwood of immortality, the magical plant that Gilgamesh sank to the bottom of the sea to fish out from Abzu after being sailed out to it by Urshanabi. So of course, Urshanabi kind of connected to Ciao and is an integral part of this myth. And as such, the Adu Namtil is something I'm choosing to allow Ciao to bestow to your heroes to give them longer life, if not immortality. Next unique tech, Coxswains. This is researched at the dock. Ships gain plus 10% speed and take a little less bonus damage. Coxswain is, of course, an English word, meaning a stroke collar. But in the source material, the stroke collars of Ciao's ship are directly referenced and praised, specifically in the myth Enki and the World Order. And as such, makes sense to me that they could be referenced here as a technology that makes your ships faster and tougher. Last technology, Socket Axe. This is researched at the Tibira. Shuplugal, so your elite axemen, and Tukulum, your bonker ships, gain plus 10% attack and cost a little less gold. So the socket axe was the funny kind of duck-billed Sumerian axe blade, and it was a major military innovation because since metalworking wasn't great, axes would break all the time. But if you can like slot a new axe head onto the top of a haft, suddenly it makes them more durable and more reusable. And these weapons were probably the weapon of choice for sailors, hence them being on the bonker ship, which I choose to interpret as like a boarding ship, as well as the shublugal, which of course you want to be positioning around your heroes, tying into Ciao's hero theming. Moving on to the next heroic age god, we have Ishtaran. Looking very glamorous. That's a Pantene model if I've ever seen one. He is to do with defenses. He is the god of justice, meant to be an aspirational example for kings to measure their own integrity by. He was a high-ranking god, very high-ranking, but not a lot is known about him. He was affiliated with snakes, linking him to a lot of other serpent gods, and he was described as being beautiful, so beautiful that he gave off like heavenly rays of light. He's also associated heavily with borders and boundaries, justice of a more diplomatic kind. His patronage bonus gives this town center substantial bonus crush armor, making it harder to besiege. He is available to Enlil and Inanna, and his myth unit we will get to later. His god power is Blinding Light. Enemies in an area have minus 75% attack, but if they go out of the area, the debuff leaves. It only applies to the area, also meaning that if new enemies come in, they are newly affected by the debuff. 75% is a big penalty, of course. This has a low duration and a mid-repeat cost, but a low cooldown, so it is actually quite spammable if you have the favor. This is obviously based on Ishtaran's Radiance, plus also like a reference to his role as a peacekeeper and arbiter, because you're reducing attack. Stop fighting! I'm too pretty. His unique technology, first one at least, is Asu Sisa, researched at the Ziggurat. It makes Ziggurats and Egal emit a healing aura, doubly effective on buildings. So it lets your biggest buildings heal other buildings nearby. Asusisa was one of Ishtaran's epithets. It meant just healer. Ishtaran was associated with healers, probably to do with remedial justice more than like literal healing. Hence why I have this be more effective on buildings to kind of represent his role in stabilizing society. Next unique tech, Murik Tidnum, researched at the Egal. Walls are built twice as fast, and non-siege units attacking them take damage over time. Only a little bit, but enough to be annoying. The Murik Tidnum was a massive wall, like almost like a great wall, you could say, that bisected Sumeria, built by the southern city-states to keep out the northern Amorites and like lesser Sumerian powers, who they referred to broadly as the Tidnum. Walls and boundaries are very much Ishtaran's domain, and I think this is a really cool way of representing keeping out the unwanted neighbors. Last unique tech, Nira. This is researched at the Egal or a tower, and it allows Egal and tower shots to apply a weak poison, identical to other poisons we've seen in the game recently added. Nira was Ishtaran's divine messenger, or Shipru. He is often depicted as a horned viper, very befitting Ishtaran's affiliation to snakes, hence why it allows shooting out of defensive buildings to apply poison. It's almost like the arrow is an incarnation of his servant flying down to deliver the message, go away. Last heroic age god, jeez, this section is taking a while, is Gula. Gula is a pretty interesting goddess. She benefits healing, which might sound indistinct, but you'll see why in a moment. She is the goddess of medicine and midwifery, heavily associated with dogs. In later eras, she rose to enormous importance and was the daughter of An, wife of Ninurta, who is very important, but we won't be getting to in this build. Notice that as a daughter of An, she is one of the original 7 Anunnaki gods. She was associated with a bunch of other goddesses and maybe like merged with them over time. And she was a healer of people and land alike, but also had a serious temper and was invoked often in curses. Her patronage bonus is that the NC linked to this TC, or through a ziggurat, gains a substantial splash radius on its heal, meaning that if you group up a couple of people around the hero your NC is healing, it'll heal all of them, which is quite good considering the NC's heal is very substantial. Gula is available to both Enki and Inanna, and her myth unit we will get to later. Her god power is Azugalatu, and it causes all your units map-wide to be healed. This is a stronger effect than Restoration, but takes much longer, meaning that unlike Restoration, which can really keep your units alive for a while, it's quite easy to overwhelm the healing of Azugalatu, but it will give you more benefit in total per unit, and also hits everything that you have map-wide. It has a high repeat cost and a mid cooldown. Azugalatu means great healer, and it was one of Gula's primary epithets. Her first unique technology is Muranu. This is researched at the Ziggurat. When enemy myth units are near, Ziggurats steadily spawn Hounds of Gula to fight them. These are like set animals, pretty weak, with a timed life, but a huge attack bonus versus myth units, making them very effective and annoying deterrents. Muranu means young dog, and the Hounds of Gula are a recurrent motif in art and literature, and are seeming to be like an apotropaic figure, which means protection against evil. They are invoked in protective spells and hymns and charms, and are very effectively described as warding off evil creatures. Next, unique technology, Dumu Munus. This is researched at the Ziggurat. All of your units, all of them, have a very weak lifesteal effect. It's tiny, but it's enough to add up, especially when it affects all your units. By some accounts, leeches were referred to as the daughters of Gula. Could be referred to their use in like bloodletting in medicine, or just kind of showing her cruel, nasty, evil side. But either way, I hear leeches, I think lifesteal. Last, Bulug Kingur. This is researched at the Tibira, and it makes so that all healing effects sourced from your units or buildings, not god powers, are 33% greater. More greater. Nice typo. Anyways. Bulug Kingur means lancet. Surgery and its tools were very much the domain of Gula, and were actually used pretty regularly by the Sumerians. They figured out a good amount of medical breakthroughs relative to their technology. And as such, having a blanket boost to healing will not only synergize substantially with Dumamunus, but also the other many healing effects that you see on the Sumerians, such as Gula's own patronage bonus. You can see now why I have her as a healing-focused goddess more than anything else. On, finally, to the Mythic Age, beginning with Ninhursag. She focuses on siege and heroes. She is the goddess of motherhood and mountains. She is associated, like Gula, with many other fertility and earth goddesses, even Ki, the primordial earth. And she had so many children, including Ninurta, who again, we'll talk about a little later. By some accounts, she even helped Enki create mankind, molding the clay with him, which I think is probably likely to have been like the canonical version of the myth. She even healed Enki himself, the healer, after a wild series of events. I don't even know if I'm going to get into this, but in summary, he got her pregnant, then got their daughter pregnant, then got their granddaughter pregnant, then got sick, and then Ninhursag got pregnant by him again while he was sick, and then gave birth to like 8 gods at once who all combined their powers to heal him. It's so weird. Sumerian mythology is such a trip. Anyways, Ninhursag was connected to wild animals, especially deer, and the seasons, which she bore. She gave birth to the seasons all by Enlil, not Enki for once. Her patronage bonus is that this TC trains Gurush, villagers, 3 times faster. Wow, just pumping out the babies. She is available to both Enlil and Enki. And her myth unit we will get to later. Now, her god power is Shasuru. Shasuru spawns dozens of neutral clay men around TCs, map-wide, like Fimbulvetur. These clay men don't fight. Instead, they automatically try to gather any resource nearby, and you get those resources. They'll come, they'll gather your own stuff, and you get it. They'll gather from your enemies, and you get it. They gather from neutral town centers' resource nodes nearby, and you get it. So they're a huge pain in the ass, and the enemies are very highly incentivized to try to kill them before they just steal all their resources. Shasuru has a mid-high duration, making it a serious pain in the butt. It has a high repeat cost and a high cooldown. Claymen are tough, especially to arrow fire, meaning that a TC is not normally going to be enough to take them out. Shasuru roughly translates to womb goddess, one of Ninhursag's many epithets. She is described as the mother of all, and like I said, helped Enki sculpt the first men from clay. And as such, her god power, she births a shit ton of clay people. But they don't fight. Her unique tech first one is Mother Omega. It's researched at the Egal and makes heroes gradually gain stats over time like an animal fattening, capping out at plus 50% HP, plus 25% attack. Many kings claimed lineage from Ninhursag, and kings were often said to have been nourished by the milk of Ninhursag. The reason I call this Mother Omega is the Omega symbol was heavily associated with Ninhursag and was meant to represent a womb. As such, with all that put together, she feeds your heroes, makes them grow big and strong, drink your milk, get nice calcium in your bones, and they become beefier over time. Next unique technology, Giparu. Giparu is researched at the Ziggurat. All of your units, all of them, are trained 25% faster. Whoa, that's pretty strong. Giparu were symbolic wedding beds. Initially like a real thing, on which like sacred marriages were consummated, but later like a place within a temple, like a cloister. And also appear often in Sumerian art, representing abundance and fertility. And yeah, you can see a theme on Ninhursag. Yeah, the abundance and fertility. She makes all your units pop out faster. Anyways, last unique technology, Kaunakis. This is researched at the Ziggurat. This makes so that your Erin and your Gusidili, your 2 siege units, gain plus 20% HP and minus 10% hack vulnerability. So Kaunakis were the very heavy tiered skirts, like fluffy and feathery looking things. You see them in art of Sumeria all the time. They're a common fashion item, but they were very heavily associated with Ninhursag. Her Kaunakis specifically were very pronounced and meant to represent rolling foothills. And I think this is one of the bigger stretches on this build. Like, why would this affiliate to Siege? I don't know, man. With the Erin and the Gusidili creating ramps out of dirt, I feel like they're pretty Earth affiliated. And since Ninhursag's Kaunakis were meant to represent foothills, that represents kind of robustness to me. So It's a stretch, but I think it fits kind of well. And I need to have a siege bonus somewhere on this damn build. Next, God, we're nearly done, guys. Let's get through it. Ishkur. He is another Mythic Age god focusing on chariots and archers. He is the god of storms, extremely warlike, a son of either An or Enlil. Again, it's always so confusing. He was less important in early Sumeria because Enlil and Ninurta kind of supplanted his domain, but Akkad valued him much higher. He was called Adad in that. But he was still present in earlier Sumeria as well. He was seen as both a benevolent rainbringer and a destructive stormbringer. He was likened to a warlord, marshaling the ravaging winds as his soldiers, and he could make the land barren or abundant at will. Again, showing the kind of fickle, temperamental nature of storms. His patronage bonus makes this Egal train soldiers 50% faster. He musters your army quickly, and then they swarm upon your opponent. He's available to both Enlil and Inanna, his myth unit we will cover later. His god power is Windstorm. This is the Sumerians' Worldbreaker god power, and it heavily damages all units and buildings over time in an area and hurls them in a chosen direction. So when you place the god power, you choose a direction and just flings everyone in that direction. It also depletes resource nodes, which can be very, very annoying if you plot this down in your enemy's economy. It has kind of a low mid duration like most Worldbreakers, high repeat cost, high cooldown. Of course, hid cooldown. Another typo. I'm not fixing it. Destructive weather was Ishkur's go-to, and according to one hymn, he destroyed the rebellious land and makes it barren. Hence why I have this also depleting resource nodes, which I think is a pretty cool and unique gimmick. First unique technology, Kankal Kigia, researched at the Ziggurat. Rubble from buildings blocks enemy building placement. Whenever you destroy a building, gain 20% of its resource cost. I should note, since building rubble kind of vanishes over time, this means that building being destroyed wouldn't block enemies forever, just for like a minute or however long the graphic of the rubble lasts for. Kankal Kigia translates to fallow omen, which covers Ishkur's ability to bring both desolation and fertility. You destroy enemy buildings, stop them from building there, but you get resources. And he was also connected to kind of divination and curses. You're like cursing the land to stop your enemies building there. Next unique technology, Nimgir. This is researched at the Egal. Archers, including the Shubur, though it's a throwing unit, still an archer, gain plus 10% attack, and their projectiles fly 50% faster. So they're easier to hit. Nimgir means flashing lightning, and it was the favored weapon of Ishkur. He was often depicted wielding it, very Zeus-like. And since it's a projectile, I felt it could buff your other projectiles and make them fly fast like lightning. Last unique technology, Rolling Thunder. I'm not really happy with this art. It's meant to be like a chariot wheel with sparks coming off it, but it just looks like a mess. It's researched at the Nagaru. Melee chariots gain plus 20% attack and plus 33% blast damage within a tight radius, so they all gain a nice area effect attack. Thunder was described as Ishkur's roar. And it's like a battle cry of him. And I thought that it's not a hard association to connect that to the sound of rumbling chariot wheels. Hence my choice to name it Rolling Thunder. Nearly done. Last minor god or goddess, Eresh Kigal. A Mythic Age god associated with myth units, as many underworld baddies are. She is the queen of the underworld, or Kur, as it's called. There's a lot of names for the underworld. Kur is the easiest. She is the daughter of probably Enlil, or maybe An. And she's the sister of Inanna, though some sources say sister is used like metaphorically. She's a husband to a god called Gugalana, and later to a god called Nergal, who's very important, especially in Babylonian times and beyond. She was one of many underworld gods, but she almost always presided over the others. She was supplanted by her husband Nergal in later periods, but we're not talking about those. She was almost never directly worshipped, but was very prominent in literature and definitely had dedicated temples and was undeniably important and high-ranking. She does not have a patronage bonus, a funky reference to her not being actively worshipped, but don't worry, she compensates for it. She's available to both Enki and Inanna. She has 3 myth units, which we will be getting into a little bit later. But before then, her god power, 7th Ganzir. This creates an instant gate segment, nearly indestructible, across a targeted area. Just pops out of nowhere. Enemies can pass through this gate, but if they do, they get a huge attack, armor, and speed debuff until they pass back through the gate. Interesting. They can also try to destroy it, but God, it's hard to. It is a permanent fixture. It only goes away if the enemy manages to destroy it and has a high repeat cost, but a mid cooldown. Ganzir were underworld entrances. And Kur is said to have had 7 gates held by Neti, the underworld gatekeeper. In many myths, people passing through the gates of the underworld are required to leave articles of clothing or weapons of power behind. Kind of like strip poker, but you're literally going to hell instead of just figuratively. And because of this, gods are stripped of their power as they enter the underworld and therefore left powerless to Ereshkigal. This is why Inanna couldn't conquer. She left behind all of her valuable shit, and Ereshkigal just said, okay, now you're my prisoner. And as such, enemies can pass through the gates of hell, but if they do, they're losing a lot. Unique technology. First one, Banda Arali. Researched at the Ziggurat. Myth units cost minus 33% favor, and they spawn up to 30 range, same as a ballista, from the source building in the direction of the rally point. So if you plop your rally point down like 30 range away from the Ziggurat, the myth unit will spawn at that rally point. If you put it beyond that, it will spawn as close in that direction as it can. So you have teleporting myth units. Banda Arali meant spawn of the underworld. It's like a poetic term for demons. And they were often described as bursting from the earth when they came to call. Hence, they teleport when you create them. Next unique technology, mineral libations. Researched at the Ziggurat. Human units dying generates a little favor. Dead souls who lived in the underworld were said to only be able to drink sand, and it was a miserable existence. So gifts of treated water were poured into graves via like special clay pipes to quench the metaphysical thirsts of your ancestors. And pouring these libations was considered like a pretty important part of society. Your ancestors would curse you if you didn't uphold this. Last unique technology, death pits. Researched at the Egal. Destroyed Egal of yours, refund all gold cost, including the town center's original gold cost, and spawn a relic. A permanent actual relic, like the ones that start on the maps at the beginning of the game, randomized, that only you can claim. And so if your enemies are pushing on you and destroying some of your Egal, you're at least getting some sick bonuses in return, assuming you can get a hero out to collect them. This is in reference to the royal graves of Ur, which were an incredible cache of archaeological finds, and being funereal are associated with Ereshkigal. We're done with minor gods, and yet the build isn't over. It's time for myth units. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying my best to be fast. Let's start with classical age myth units. The Mashkim. This is a wind demon, a divine messenger and enforcer. It's a fast unit, good line of sight, mid-ranged, damage over time sandblast attack. Imagine a fire ship in Age of Empires 2. You just... But like, if you only hold it for a second, it's doo-doo. But over time, it can really stack up. Mashkim has high pierce armor, but is otherwise quite squishy. Mashkim are an interesting case. They're often portrayed as evil, but the reality is more complex. Demons were often servants of the gods rather than being enemies, though sometimes they were enemies. Mashkim in particular seem to more be like demonic envoys of the gods. The name roughly translates to something like bailiff. And they even make a brief appearance in Genesis, under the Bible, Genesis, under the Akkadian name Rabisu, which translates to lurker. They are available through Nidaba, and while they don't have any connection to Nidaba, they're more of an Enlil thing. I think they are an okay thematic fit because of her god power Selenize, and her kind of connection to destroying the fertility of an area. Because the Mashkim were like sandy wind is how they were usually described. And honestly, I couldn't really find a better fit for her. Next myth unit, Shegsag. This is a 6-headed wild ram, one of the monsters defeated by Ninurta. They're pretty quick, about as fast as a chariot, very beefy, and they deal splash damage to all units nearby, including allies, whenever they attack. So be careful. They have a special too, which is after a brief delay, they like rear back, and then they do a headlong charge in a given direction. They hit everything in their path and fling human units aside, including allies. You can't turn or re-aim them once they begin charging. So you have these little goat missiles launching in at your enemies. Not little, they're huge. The Shegsag is not a well-attested myth creature. It's mostly there to like give Ninurta something cool to show off against, but it does show up there. While it doesn't have any link to Ninkasi, the goddess who unlocks it, I think that its like wild, drunken nature and like mild earth affinity are decent enough fits for her. Especially the match with like wild area effect damage to allies that is shared with her god power. Last classical age myth unit, the Udug Hul. These are shadow demons, evil by nature. They have high damage but pretty bad defensive and poison attacks. They have a special, which is a bellowing scream, which terrifies nearby human enemies into briefly fleeing, like running away from the Uduk-hul uncontrollable by their user, but only for a couple seconds. Like a lot of Sumerian demons, Uduk could be good or evil. They could be protective guardians or bringers of illness. The Uduk-hul specifically means evil Uduk. They are actually linked directly to Dumuzid. They, or possibly the later Galu, were the type of demons who dragged him down to Kur once he was slated to take Inanna's place. So it actually makes sense that Dumuzid would be affiliated with these demons of shadow. Heroic Age myth units, beginning with the Shutabni. These are stone ones. That's what the name translates to. The crew of Urshanabi's ship. And again, Urshanabi is a character who is linked thematically to Sirsir. Shutabni are tanky for their cost, very cheap on favor. They're like stone men. But they're slow and they don't have a great attack rate. However, when a hero is nearby, their speed and attack rate jump up to average, making them kind of like the Shublugal in terms of benefiting from nearby heroes, much like Sirsir's overarching hero theme. Shutabni appear in exactly one myth. Gilgamesh had to fight them to gain passage with Urshanabi, and it's possible that they might have been like living statues as I have them here, but it could have also been like a metaphorical thing instead. Either way, they do have a link to Sirsir, since I have him kind of bundled in with other oceanic gods and figures like Urshanabi. Next, the Girtablilu. Look familiar? This is a scorpion man. This is what civilization should actually have, the goddamn scorpion man, instead of the stupid Dwayne The Rock Johnson head ass that the Egyptians have. The Girtablilu is armed with a bow, and it can come in either male or female varieties, like a villager type unit, purely cosmetic. Girtablilu are pretty quick. They're expensive, but they're fairly tanky. They have okay range damage, but they have strong poison attacks when they are fought in melee. So if they attack someone in melee, they stop using their bow and just pincer and sting them instead. They have a special, which is after a brief delay, they terrify a single target, human or myth, with anywhere within their line of sight, forcing it to flee for like a pretty substantial period. So unlike the Uduk-hul, it doesn't hit all units, but it's at a range, and it lasts longer. Girtablilu, or Scorpion Men, come up quite a few times in myth. They are like described as the primordial spawn of Tiamat, but also described later as wardens or guardians. They're also a very recurrent motif in artwork, including depicting them holding with bows. Their later roles as wardens, especially for like heavenly gods like Utu, the sun god, give them some decent connection to Ishtaran, who is the god who enables them in my build. Last, Heroic Age myth unit, the Urdimno. This is a dog-lion anthropomorphic warrior. They are a well-rounded brawler with better attack, speed, and armor as their HP goes down, so they kind of berserk as they go lower. They upgrade via a special technology called Kalbushegu to the Rabid Urdimo, which gets better stats and also a poison attack. The Urdimo are another of the primordial spawn of Tiamat. They are demons, but they took on protective roles as well as aggressive ones, and may have even been worshipped. Their name translates roughly to like rabid dog, and they're described as like rabid and gruesome and grisly in a lot of texts, and yet still seem to have been kind of associated with positively. Since they are protective in nature sometimes, and dog-like, they are a great fit for Gulla, who is the goddess who enables them. Mythic Age time. There's a bunch of them here. First, the Kusariku. This is a mighty lance-wielding bison man. They're burly for their cheap cost. They have okay damage, but they're kind of slow, and they have a little splash damage when they attack. Their special allows them to summon an ethereal wall segment through themselves before they attack. This wall segment is temporary but indestructible while the Kusariku lives, and only allies can pass through it. It's effectively a way to bottleneck your enemies in and cut off escape routes. Kusariku have ambiguous morality, like almost all other Sumerian demons. They're an enemy to Ninurta in one story, a guardian spirit, and sage in the next. And unfortunately, they're not brilliantly linked to Ninhursag, but both are closely affiliated with mountains, and again are somewhat protective in nature. Next, the Ushumgalu. This is one of the coolest ones. It's a lion-dragon demon. Expensive but terrifying with great rounded stats. It can fly or land at will. It's toggleable. You can either have it be flying or have it be landing. While flying, it can fight other flyers in melee very effectively. And on the ground, it has less power overall, but better splash damage. So it's kind of 2 units in one, and you can fly it around and murder enemy rocks and stuff like that. I think that would be sick. Ushumgalu were portrayed as enemies of the gods, with some deities like Ninurta, again, claimed to have defeated it, but not just Ninurta this time. Like a bunch of different gods were said to have fought and killed the Ushumgalu. But they were heavily associated with Ishkur specifically, and may have been like some of his enforcers and helped him like ferry storms to the location. Whatever the reason, they actually have direct connection to Ishkur, unlike a lot of the myth units, which I had to get a little bit more abstract with. Finally got one. Next, the Gidim. This is the first of Ereshkigal's units. It is a dead soul which works as a villager. This is an alternative villager. It has terrible stats, but it's dirt cheap, costing like a couple favor and nothing else. And it's able to drop resources remotely, like a Khmer farmer in Age of Empires 2. When killed, a Gidim curses its killer, inflicting slow damage over time and reducing stats. Like I said, humans were servants to the gods, but in death as well as life. Their existence was a miserable one when dead, though. Hence why the Gidim are these drudge workers that you can actually send anywhere across the map, and your enemy might not want to kill them for fear of being cursed. Illness, like I mentioned earlier with mineral libations, was often believed to result from slighting a Gidim. And of course, they were one of the primary inhabitants of Ereshkigal's domain, Kur. Next of Ereshkigal's is the Edimu. This is a vengeful dead, almost incorporeal. It has terrible stats besides its speed, but is invisible, even when attacking, like a Dark Templar in StarCraft. Only certain units, buildings, and heroes can pierce their stealth. You'd have to like assign a new like stealth breaker power to certain things, like, you know, scout units and maybe some heroes like ranged heroes, and maybe temples could do it, I don't know. But only certain things could pierce stealth. And even then, not at full line of sight range. Edimu were demonic revenants, effectively. Believed to arise from improper burials and linked to sudden infant deaths and similar maladies that couldn't be explained by Sumerian technology. They were another of Ereshkigal's many subjects in Kur. And being permanently invisible would make them a very interesting late-game harassment and raiding unit. Last of the Mythic Age myth units for now is the Galu. This is a powerful demon enforcer of the underworld. They're expensive, they're burly, they're pretty fast, and they have a special where they can grab a human unit and dive into an earthen portal, emerging with the grabbed unit at the furthest ziggurat that you have and preventing that unit from moving or attacking for a few seconds. So effectively, it's an instant kill that teleports your Galu across the map. I mean, it's functionally a kill. Like, presumably you'll have defensive buildings around, stuff like that. But the fact that you could have like a troop of Galu go out, grab some humans, and dive away as like a hit squad, I think is super duper cool. They are among the strongest demons in Sumerian myth, almost always a subject of fear, even to the gods. You could consider them Ereshkigal's police force, ensuring that death came to those fated for it. They were among the ones who took away Inanna and Dumuzid to Ereshkigal and many others besides. But wait, there's more! There are a couple of myth units not affiliated to any god. Now that naval myth units have been completely separated out, we have the Kululu. This is a primordial fishman, a universal naval myth unit with both male and female cosmetic variants. They're cheap, but they don't have awesome stats. And they are amphibious, though they incur a speed and attack penalty on land. They have a special, though, which lets them dive deep underwater for 10 seconds. They can't enter shallow water or attack, and they have much less line of sight, but they cannot be attacked whatsoever and are invisible except to select units, as mentioned with the Edimu. Even if their invisibility is pierced, though, they cannot be attacked still. The Kululu are not super well attested. They're a recurrent motif in pottery towards the later end of this culture's time frame in Akkad. They're another spawn of Tiamat, possibly killed by Ninurta. Last naval myth unit, the Lammo. This is a mud serpent, another universal naval myth unit, male and female variants again, though, I mean, maybe more in the sense of like a Pokemon has male and female variants where it's slightly different colored. It has good stats, especially high pierce armor and HP, and regenerates. Its special is that it leaves a trail of mud that lasts about 10 seconds wherever it passes. This is a passive effect, which substantially lowers enemy unit speed, it should say, that pass through the mud trail. So the Lamu are great for running laps around your enemies and making their army much harder to maneuver at sea. Lamu means muddy one. And the Lamu were pretty numerous. They were probably a collection of like ancient river spirits that were recontextualized in classical Sumerian traditions. They were even considered, in some stories, primordial ancestors of Anu, but later stories place them again as children of Tiamat. They're often portrayed as like well-clad men and women, but they're also often portrayed as great serpents. So I took the serpent route for this particular build. And lastly, we got a Titan, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Bull of Heaven. Of note, I don't think that Titans should be homogenous, so I'm like deliberately pushing the boundaries with this design. The Bull of Heaven is a quadrupedal Titan. I think it's dumb how they're all these big hulking doofuses. It has higher speed than most Titans and a bigger bonus versus buildings, but slightly worse attack overall. On death, it gives 1,000 food to both you and the killer. The Bull of Heaven was sent by Inanna to kill Gilgamesh in revenge for him rejecting her. It was killed by him and Enkidu, and eventually led to Enkidu's death as a punishment. There's even a chance that the Bull of Heaven was Ereshkigal's husband, Gugalana, one of whose epithets had to do with him being a bull. But that is also probably metaphorical. The food thing comes from the fact that after they killed the Bull of Heaven, Enkidu and Gilgamesh butchered it, and I think they even fed it to the citizens of Ur. There's also quite a funny bit where Enkidu chucks a leg at Inanna as like a taunt for her failing to kill them, and it was actually him doing so that led to him being punished with death. But overall, that's what our Titan is going to be for this build. Oh my god, guys, we're nearly done. We're on the last two sections. These ones will be shorter, promise. Relics. I have 15 new additions of relics to the game. I'm going to be going through them super fast. I've got the Cedar Gate of Nippur, which gives gates more HP and blocks god powers. Instructions of Shurupak, which makes heroes trained or promoted 33% faster. The Lapis Matic, which replaces the current Black Lotus, which is a dumb MTG reference and not mythological, much though I like MTG, and makes villagers collect food from farms 10% faster. Liars of Ur, age-ups cost 10% less. This also steals from the current generic Titan's treasure, which can keep the Titan like gate discount stuff. I don't care about that. If you want to see any of like my context or like descriptions of what these relics are sourced from, take a look on screen right now. Anyways, moving on, we have the Magilum Boat, which makes so that transported units are saved if the ship is sunk. I could get into the mechanics on that, but we don't have time. The Mask of Sargon, heroes deal plus 10% damage against human units. The Meskalamdug Helm, infantry gain a very weak ranged dodge shield, like the Shriwansh Rider in Age of Empires 2, but with only like one charge recharging every like 10 to 15 seconds, so it's very weak, but still, it's a dodge shield. Of note, a lot of these relics are actual archaeological finds, which I think is a really cool way to design relics, and helps them be a little more grounded, even if I'm giving them like supernatural effects. Another Ninkasi's Fermenting Vat, which makes your god powers make targets drunk. I think this will be frickin' hysterically funny. Queen Puabi's Headdress, heroes generate some gold on death. The Ram Horn Scepter, building a town center spawns 3 free villagers. Ram in a Thicket, spawns rams over time, kind of like the Golden Lion thing or the Barrel Full of Monkeys or whatever the fuck it's called. Or, of course, herdables, but it generates them pretty slowly. And they said that herdables generate gold when you are gathering from them. The Rod and Ring, which makes fortresses being built 40% faster. This one's pretty interesting because the Rod and Ring is a super recurrent motif in Sumerian art, but we have no idea what it means. It was probably to do with kingship. The Standard of Ur, human soldiers take up minus 10% population. Stele of the Vultures, human soldiers get a very weak lifesteal effect. And lastly, the Strong Copper, smith techs give favor on completion. Whoa, that was a lot. All right, guys, let's move on before my poor voice craps out. The final part, loose threads. God, there's so much to talk about still. I have follow-up plans for this build, a DLC for this build, a second video in future that focuses on Ninurta. Now, this would follow the precedent newly set by the Freyr DLC that we heard about, and I think it's sick. Ninurta is the biggest omission from this build. He was a heroic god of plowing and agriculture and storms, but was also very much like Heracles. And this would give the chance to bring in more gods, myth units, and techs and stuff that I didn't get a chance to fit into this build. Plus, any balance changes that you guys recommend to me for this build down in the comments section. Some minor gods I have planned for this DLC would include Asar, the god of magic, Ninazu, the god of snakes, Ninlil, Enlil's wife. And if you want to see this DLC follow-up video, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Another follow-up plan I have to this would be a Babylon Assyria build. I keep talking about it. There's so much great content that had to be cut from this build for space, and almost all of it can be repurposed here. My current plan would be to have Sun, the moon god, Shamash, the sun god, and Nergal, Ereshkigal's husband, the god of the dead, as major gods for Babylon Assyria, with a cool gimmick where there are only 2 Mythic Age gods, Marduk, the patron of Babylon, and Ashur, the patron of Assyria. And which one you choose will bring huge changes to your civilization and make it feel truly Babylonian or Assyrian rather than hybridizing the two. I think it would be sick. And there's tons of gods like Bao and Sababa and Ninagal and Ninaya, and myth units like the Lamasu and Mushkushu and the Ugalu, but that's not even all. I also had the idea for a third primordial culture that focuses on like Tiamat and Abzu and An and Ki, plus all the other Sumerian primordials, with like a similar vibe to the Atlanteans, but I hope to do it much more authentically. I haven't said it in this build yet, so for those keeping track at home, the Atlanteans are a stupid faction that shouldn't be in the game. Now, do you want to see any of these ideas? A DLC focusing on Ninurta, a Babylon Assyria build, a primordial Sumerian build? Let me know down in the comments. I want to hear about it. This build took so freaking long to make, but it's been so much fun, and I think there's more fun to be had. Let's get through some tabled ideas. God, there are so freaking many. If Age of Mythology cultures were like 2 or 3 times bigger than they currently are, here are some of the ideas I would throw in here. Mechanics like a city aura, which boosts your units when you're at town center or Egal. Maybe those could even be like linked to the patronage bonuses. Another favor mechanic called offerings, where you trade at like a quote-unquote a market at your temple for favor. So like deposit, like get rid of 100 food, get 10 favor or some crap like that. I actually like this idea a lot and probably will use it on another build. What if wood lasted less long to represent them not having good access to wood? It could be a good way to balance the culture if its ego is too strong. Ziggurats getting the functions of a market, destroying enemy TCs or village centers, spawning you Gurush. A bunch of different ways to make chariots more interesting. Go take a look on screen right now if you want to see those. I'm not going to go through all these tabled ideas. It would just take too long and my poor voice is dying. But if you want to see more of my tabled ideas, take a look on screen right now. Check the speaker notes all through the slides of this presentation. I left notes all the way through. I even have some ideas for like new common technologies, like awkwardly focusing on ships. I don't know why it just came up. Like a lapstrake technology. Referencing clinker build ships, which the Sumerians used along with the Norse, which would reduce like ship cost and train time. What about a thing called bitumen waterproofing, which without this tick, all ships very slowly lose HP over time? I think that's pretty cool and would definitely make sense as like a common technology across all cultures. But jeez, there's so many more, guys. I have a whole shit ton of units. If you want to see them, go look on screen. There is so much to go through with this build in general that I just can't spare the time to go into a ton of detail. But in summary, I'd like another half dozen plus ideas for human units, a whole bunch of ideas for heroes. And some of these hero ideas I actually really, really liked, but I wanted to keep it like on the simple side, more in line with how heroes actually exist in-game right now. Why isn't my goddamn slideshow loading? There it is. Thanks, slideshow. Well, anyways, look on screen right now if you want to see a whole shit ton of interesting hero and unit ideas. Hey, guess what? I have more hero ideas. My friends, it's 11:45. I've been recording for 2 hours. This build will be the end of me. Let's talk uncertainties. If you want to see more hero ideas, take a look on screen right now. I don't even know where to start with uncertainties for this build. Like everything, I'm uncertain about everything. This build is huge. I don't have specific numbers. It's so massive I can't even begin to tease apart the potential issues. So I'm going to outsource it to you guys. If you see ways to make this build more balanced, flavorful, and authentic, let me know down in the comments. But honestly, I had a blast with this build. When I designed for Age of Empires 2, I'm so like limited in what I can do, but with Age of Mythology, I can just go hog frickin' wild. And yeah, it's a ton of work, but it's so fun being able to create such a massive, unique roster of things and reference so many cool elements of Sumerian history and culture and religion. I hope you guys enjoyed, because I really did. And with that, we come to the end of this monstrous Sumerian build. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you sat through this monstrosity, applause to you. You are commendable and I appreciate you. Before we go, let's take a look at the Likeliometer. In my opinion, how likely is it that the Sumerians as a culture will be added to Age of Mythology Retold at some point in the future? And on the Likeliometer, we have a 9 out of 10. I actually think it is quite likely that the Sumerians are going to be added. Not soon, maybe a year, maybe 2 years down the line, but in the first 2 or 3 new cultures they add, and it seems likely they will have a couple, I think the Sumerians are going to show up. I wouldn't be surprised if they bundled in Babylon and Assyria in as well, which I think would be lazy, but I'd understand. I would just love to have any representation of this culture in-game. The mythology is mind-bogglingly complex and beautiful and intricate, and I just fell in love with it doing the research for this civilization. I haven't looked at Sumerian mythology in like over a decade, and getting to explore it again was It just reminded me why I love it and why I love mythology in general as a topic. But that's just what I think. Now I want to hear what you guys think. How did you like this build? There was so much new. Do you enjoy Age of Mythology full-form builds, or do you think it's just too much sauce? Is there anything that you would do differently? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but let's try to simplify. What are some of the top things that you would do differently if you were to design the Sumerians yourself? Do you like my cutoff of Sumeria and Akkad as one civilization and Babylon and Assyria as another? What other Age of Mythology style videos do you want to see in the future? And of course, do you want to see some of my proposed follow-ups to this build? There's so much potential for Age of Mythology retold on my channel, and I am intensely hyped to bring it to you, even if this one almost killed me. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell. Huge thanks again to Alta for the amazing original music, and to Amiki for his consultancy on the build. And ciao for now. Very good impression, boy.